So, welcome to our webinar around preparing for Microsoft 365 Copilot. This webinar is based on the information that Microsoft has provided. Say, this is what you need to do to get ready for Copilot. But what they haven't done is given you how. So, what we've done is taken our experience in SharePoint and aim to show you some of the ways that you may be able to achieve the requirements. So, then, just on to the next slide, maybe you can just share with people what they're going to get out of today and the audience that really we're targeting today.
Yeah, perfect. No problem. So yeah, this is really for anyone who is looking at building a plan for implementing Microsoft Copilot or sort of exploring what is required to get started. But to be honest, the techniques that we're talking about here are relevant not just for Copilot. So if you're finding yourselves feeling frustrated with the lack of consistency in SharePoint, then this is actually going to benefit you as well. In terms of takeaways, we're going to run through three key things today. So the first is looking at naming standards. So how can we create a consistent approach to naming standards? The second is talking about metadata. So that concept of tagging files and how it can add context to the files that you're working on. And then finally, we're going to talk about versioning. So how do you make sure that the Copilot is going to be referring to the correct version or the final version of a document?
Okay. And look, this is one of the series, as I said earlier. So last time we covered eliminating the rot, which is the redundant, obsolete, and trivial data. So tune into that. That would be on YouTube. Today, as I said, talked about managing documents. And then next time, we're going to be covering governance around SharePoint. So how to make it easy to find and save information, managing site lifecycles. When do I use sites? When should I use document libraries? All those kind of questions to give a better user experience. So that's what we're going to be focusing on next week. So back to this week, and let's dive into the first of the three areas, which is around how do I standardize the naming of my files in SharePoint? Now, it might be that you want to educate users on how to do this, and people do try that. And we often see that works well where you've got maybe a PMO type function where people are working through project files. Or maybe you provision a site, it's got a whole load of standard documents in there, but they've all got file names pre-provisioned in there. But really, we've seen mixed results of this. Certain people just want to get things into SharePoint and crack on with their work. The second point is, well, how can we automate it? So this is where we're starting to bring some of our experience to the table here. And this is around being input driven. So maybe if I ask some questions about the parameters of this file, then I can actually populate the file name automatically and solve that problem and really drive consistency. And then the final piece is we're not always creating documents from scratch in SharePoint. So what can I do for the documents I get maybe from a supplier or a customer and want to put those in SharePoint? How can I add some consistency to the naming of those? Now, the reason this is important is because Copilot takes this information to help understand about which is the current version of a file, for example. So maybe you have a quarterly report and it's got 2311 and you've got another one from say, 2308. It's got the intelligence to work out which one of these should I be looking at for the most current data. So this is why naming is important. There's also a secondary benefit that when people are searching for files or scanning things through, or there might be scenarios when you're sending maybe that quarterly report to a client via email. When they look for their email, they know exactly which file they're looking at because they've got all the right information in the file name. So Ben, there's the scenarios. Do you want to take us through what your experience has shown us and some things that we've developed?
So I think the first thing that we really need to be thinking about is this concept of getting users to apply a standard file naming convention. So let's say, for instance, just very quickly, I was going to create a new document and explore phase contract. What we'd want to do here is educate people and encourage them to be following a standard that we've published and defined. So in that case, we are very much relying on them to go and follow a standard that might be applied. So let's say this is Web Solutions Limited statement of work, for example. We're very much relying on them to do that because SharePoint has nothing out of the box that can enforce a standard naming convention. So that's the first fairly key point. Okay, so I've just gone and applied a naming convention to that document, which is all very well, but as we know, not everyone is going to consistently follow it. It takes quite a lot of definition and education to ensure that people are actually going through and doing that, although that is not inconceivable. So an alternative approach that we've looked at, which is where we need to start bringing in some sort of customizations here, is where we can actually capture information before the file gets created and then go and create it with a standard. So the way that we're doing that is that we've created our own framework called our expanse action. So these are tools that we can add into the context of a SharePoint library to do additional things. So in this case, we haven't got any documents selected. So what I'm going to do is click on the expanse actions, and one of the available actions in this case is to create a new document from a template. So I'm going to click on create a document from a template. And what we've effectively done here is create a simple Power App that we can load into the context of this library and then present some information back. So I'm going to create an enhancement SOW. So I'm going to go and click on that. And what we can see as I start to fill this in fact, it's already pre-saved what I did earlier. So I'm going to call that file migration SOW. And what this is effectively going to do is prompt me now to say, okay, well, what client is this actually relevant to? So if you've got your established client list, for instance, I can go and capture that information in. And as you can see, it's going through and populating what the file name is going to be before it even gets created. Now, as we talk about things like metadata a bit further down the line, we can see that this kind of approach could be expanded for that as well, so capturing just a bit more information before we get started. So I'm going to press save. We'll just give that a second. It's going and saving it from the template, from a published template location, and then it's going to go and drop it in. And I'm going to shut that down. And we can now see a new document has been dropped in. I do recognize that we had a previous version of this for the webinar that we were preparing. So it's gone and put a little 0 on the end to avoid the duplication there. But we can see that document has been dropped in, and it's gone and put the prefix on there in that standard way. Let me just zoom in as well. Make that a bit easier for people to see. So effectively what we've done is intercept the creation of the document and prompt some information that goes in first. Now, that's not a perfect solution, although it has quite a lot of value, because we still have this new button. So we may need to look at hiding the new button to stop people from doing that. And we do have this scenario that people are going to still upload documents that they might have received from elsewhere. So the third approach is where we can use some automation. So what we can do is automate whenever any new documents get uploaded, it will go through and tag them or rename them in the right way. So let's have a look at that. So I have some demo documents I'm going to go and drag and drop from here. So let's just go and do this. I'm just going to go and drop them in. And what we've basically done is create a Power Automate that will look at this library. It's going to read the client name from the document, and it's going to look at the date, and then it's going to go through and rename them. Then there's various different considerations that need to take into place, and you need to define the right rules that you can follow this in. But once you've got that, that will do the job. Now, one thing that's worth noting is the reason why these documents have been selected with the Web Solutions Limited is because we're using document set, which allow us to set information at a folder level such that any documents that go inside it will automatically be tagged in that way. And we'll talk a bit more about tagging a little bit later on. So I'm not going to wait for this. We'll see if it's come through quickly. Oh, actually, that came through pretty quickly. So we can see I uploaded the documents, and then fairly quickly it's gone through and applied that renaming. Now, clearly, if that document was opened or someone was looking at it, it would have to wait until that lock on the document had been released, and then it would be able to go and take over and do the file rename. So that kind of summarizes how we can look at naming. The key point being there's nothing out of the box that does this. So you're either using user education, or you're looking at some customization, either through an app and intercepting the creation of the document, or handling the renaming after the document's been uploaded through Power Automate. So let's move on to the next point, which is around tagging.
Yeah. And then Ben, just a question on that. So when you created that document, you had one drop down. I'm assuming maybe you could have a couple of drop downs if you wanted to build up that file name a little bit further in using maybe other controls.
Yeah, absolutely. A common drop-down value you might add is things like what type of document is it? Is it a statement of work, or is it an NDA, for instance? Yeah.
Okay, that is really cool. And obviously the fact that the templates are centrally controlled means you're always going to get the right version of that template. We're not going to be taking that copy from my desktop, which I saved last year, and then repurposing it.
Exactly that.
Cool. Very clever stuff there. Okay, so part 2, we're going to be talking about tagging documents. Now, a lot of people have heard the phrase taxonomy and thinking, what does that mean? How does that translate into the world of SharePoint? and particularly metadata. So what we've got on the left-hand side here is an HR taxonomy. And as you can see at the top level, everything is HR. Then we've created 3 levels beneath that. So personal information, employee records, L&D. And under each of those, say L&D, learning and development, we've got training certificate, a PDP, performance evaluations. So when we're tagging a document saying, what is this document? Yes, it's an HR document. Yes, it's an L&D. Right. I know what it is finally. Now, if you think if it's expanded across the whole organization, you might have 30, 40, 50, maybe more of these bottom level tags. So that's why we really need to be able to create this drill down approach. Now, that's all good and fine. But the challenge is people don't like tagging documents, or the balance is maybe we ask them to tag too many documents and maybe we're more refined about what we get to be tagged. We'd probably have a better success rate. So then we can ask people to do it themselves, saying, look, here's a box, please tag it. And we can even make that field compulsory. That may cause some frustration or some working around. But we've got other couple of ideas here as well about how can we maybe tag things by default based on some business rules. Maybe if we know it is a contract and it's always going to be a contract because it's a contract template, can we tag that document before we even start? And then obviously the latest thing with SharePoint Premium, previously called Syntex, is there an AI route to be able to tag documents? So Ben, what have you got in this area?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first thing is just having a quick look at how documents get tagged themselves. So I'm going to jump over to our HR area a minute, and I'm going to have a look in our document records library. So I've got this folder for Alan de Young here, and we can see within our library we've got these additional columns. Now we've kind of loosely been talking about tagging already in the file naming concept, but so I've got these columns of document type, and I've got the document department. We can see that all of the documents in here have been tagged as department because that's set as a default on this library. So any documents that get added will automatically be tagged as HR. But what we want to be able to do is tag the document type. So I want to go and highlight that this is in fact an offer letter. I can see it in the file name, of course, but I actually want that to be tagged to get a bit more useful information and help drive Copilot together. So I'm going to select the document and then click on the details pane on the right-hand side. And then I'm going to choose from my list of tags. So here's my predefined list of tags that I can use. I can see the offer letter is there. So I'm going to go and apply that. And then we'll see that that's saving. Okay, so now that that has saved, the tag has been applied to that document, and it's now will come through in the use of that document. So I think, as we highlighted, though, the challenge with this is that people don't intuitively go through and tag things after they've been created. Where this becomes really important, and what we find when people are regularly tagging things, is when they are publishing documents. So let's say you're working on something and then you're publishing it to an intranet or a knowledge base or something on those lines. You want to apply tagging because it's going to help people find stuff. But let's say if you're just in your working area, for instance, there's less of an incentive to do so. So it's less likely going to happen. So I find collaboration scenarios, people are still using folders and tagging doesn't happen that often. So what we want to try and do is make that process a bit easier. So if I jump over to this project area, for instance, so let's say, for example, we're working in a project. We don't want to be tagging as we go through creating documents on a project. This is about collaboration. But we can see within this project space, which is connected to a Microsoft team behind the scenes, we have these additional columns of information. We've got the type and the department, as we saw before, but we've also got this project code and the project name. So these two columns have actually been set as defaults on this library. So again, like HR, anything that comes in here is going to be tagged as part of the code and the name. But then the other thing that I'm going to be interested in is how I can bring through the document type. Now, in order to do this, I need to have a template ready that's got that information applied to it. So if I just jump into our knowledge area for a second, I can see within my set of templates here that I've already embedded the tags onto the template itself. Now, what we're using here is a concept called organizational asset libraries, which is a way of centrally managing templates, but so that they can actually come through and be available directly within the Office desktop tools. So if I jump over into PowerPoint in a minute, I'm going to go in here and create a new document. And I can see within my published area for the organization, I've got this set of PowerPoint templates, the solution design that we saw before. I'm going to click on that solution design template. And if I go and have a look at the information pane for it, I can see that that document department and the type have actually been pre-populated into the body of the document itself. So if I now go and save that document into my hydro solar project that I was showing you earlier, I'm going to go and save that in here. I'm going to go and give it a name. So revised solution design. That highlights the problem of naming that we were talking about before. So I'm just going to go and save that. So we'll see that this new document has come through. And because the template had the solution design, and in fact, actually the consulting was baked into the template itself, these two values have been populated. But because the columns for the actual project have been defaulted with the project code and the project name, then these two bits of information have also been populated. So as a user, I've not had to tag anything. All I've had to do is open a document from a template and save it into a location. And because all of the right defaults have been set up for me, a lot of that's been taken care of before I even need to think about it. Okay. So I tend to think that's the best approach. Tagging is good, but let's try and take the user out of that journey so they don't have to worry about it. Now, the final point is talking about AI. So what I'm going to do here is just come back to our document records library. We have this document type column. And actually what we have done with this is set it so that it can automatically tag documents. So this is a new feature that's been released very recently as part of SharePoint Premium or Microsoft Syntex. And what it will allow you to do is tie it to a managed metadata column, which is basically a definition of all of our tags across the organization. And if the body of the document matches key phrases against this list of tags, it will automatically apply them. So if it sees the phrase statement of work as a phrase repeated within the body of the document regularly, it will realize that that is a statement of work and it will go and apply it. I'm going to be honest, we've had mixed results with this in terms of how accurate it is. I think where it could be really useful though, if you're a product-based organization and maybe you've got a standard set of product codes or SKUs, for instance, then you can reference that standard definition of those product codes within your set of tags. And then any documents that reference those product codes, whether it's a contract, for instance, can then go and draw them out. I think the one thing it doesn't do is suggest necessarily what tags could be applied. Those tags do need to exist within this list of tags for them to be able to be used. So that's one approach. As I said, we've had mixed results with this. The other approach that you could do is apply something called a syntax model via the classify and extract option. So what we're basically prompted to do here is create a model that will be used to train and apply a classification, extract information from that document based on a series of examples. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of this because we do have a separate webinar that's been published to YouTube already on setting up the Syntex and the various different types of training models that you can use. So I'd encourage you to go and have a look at that. But effectively, what I can do is create this teaching method, train it on the different types of documents I'm interested in, and then apply it to the library so that it gets auto-applied. So yeah, I think that kind of takes us there in terms of the tagging side of things. But the final point is around versioning.
Yeah, and just wrapping up on tagging there. So the AI side, Microsoft charge on a per page basis for that. So yes, the obvious use case is where you're importing a large volume of documents, maybe from a file server or an archive and bringing them back into SharePoint, but there will be a cost associated with that. But the stuff that Ben showed you at the top is available in standard SharePoint, which is the ability to set your metadata and set it up across the whole tenant and then be able to apply back to individual documents, either baked into the template or baked into the folder or the document library itself. So that's all available to you. And it might be that you've got 6 fields of metadata, and then therefore it means the user needs to do the final one because the other 4 already been done. So we really try to take a lot of the pain away. And then we can start looking at the value of that when we start getting into search and using search filters as well. But keeping us on time, last piece is version control. Now, people who've been working with SharePoint for a while will know that SharePoint has version control built in. It's now turned on by default when you create a document library. Once upon a time, it wasn't. And that will automatically create versions as you edit the document or people come onto the document if you're co-authoring together. But people who are used to working on a file server, that needs explaining, some education there. So there's certainly an adoption piece there. The second way that version controls can be managed is through the major and minor versions. So that's the 1.0s versus the point something, point 2, point 3, point 4, which is the minor version. So we're going to talk about that and the pros and cons of that. And then the final approach that we've often taken in some scenarios is about having a separate area, maybe document library for working documents versus published documents, particularly in managing policies. And you've got a draft policy in one area and you've got the finalized approved policy in a different area and why you might want to do that. So Ben, over to you.
Okay. So, yeah, I think the key point about all of this is that what we're trying to minimize is there being multiple instances of documents. Copilot wants to be referring to a single source of the truth. So what we want to do is reduce the likelihood of creating copies of documents when actually version control is going to be able to do a lot of that for us. Now, in order to demonstrate that, I'm going to come back to our client scenario here. So I'm going to go through into our work in progress. That you might have a WIP folder where people will go through and they'll do drafting and they'll be preparing stuff and maybe different visions and comments, etc. So what we want to try and do is reduce the need for that to take place and sort of encourage people to just use sharing out of the box. So instead of copying files, just simply sharing documents with your colleagues will ensure that there's just a single document and that everyone is making modifications to that single document. So I can go and share this with Diego. And let's say, for example, if I want to share it with someone and I don't want them to be able to edit the body of the document, but they should be able to make comments, then I can go and share it in a review mode. So this person will be able to suggest changes, add comments, but not edit the body. Okay. So hi, Diego, please, can you review? So I'm just simply sharing that document instead of Diego having to go and take a copy of it and then confuse Copilot in terms of what the definitive version of that document is. Now, what we would see is we go through and make various different changes as people go through and edit this document, for instance. Let's let that load. I could come in here and just say adding my thoughts, for example. We'll just give that a second to save. So what we would see when I go through and have a look at my version history, what I will see is that that new version of that document has been saved. So obviously, as I'm going through and making my changes, anytime someone comes in and makes a modification, I can see who it was that made the change and I can see the time that they made the change. If I want to actually go and even compare that version, the previous version of the document, I can simply click on it and it will go and open that document in the desktop client and I can go and make some comparison of what happened there. Okay, so I think that's the first thing. Now, the problem we do find, though, is that's great, but we still have this scenario where, let's say, if you're working in a contractual negotiation with a third party and they are still comfortable on sending these emails back and forth with their own versions, I think the first thing I would suggest is, well, whether or not you can explore collaborating with them externally. So, you can actually go and send a share with colleagues or your clients, or perhaps, a legal firm, for instance. So you can go and send that outside of your organization and collaborate that way. So that's the first thing. However, that's not always going to be practical. There may be some resistance to that if you want to keep things separate. So the other thing that we can consider here, there are tools that make this a little bit easier, but just using some functionality out of the box, what I can do, let's say, for instance, I've received a file from an external party, a legal third party, and they've updated it. This is something that you might see quite common, XYZBL comments. Now, if I want to maintain this document and ensure it's kept as a single document and not lots of copies, then as long as I rename this file before I upload it into SharePoint. So I've come through and I've renamed it so that it matches the existing file name. I'm going to upload it here. And what it's going to do is say, okay, there's a version of this document already. What do you want to do? Do you want to keep both, which will end up with 2 copies? We want to avoid that. Or do I want to replace it? So if I replace it, give that a second. What we'll see if I look at the version history is, again, that's created a new version. So I've still got a single document. I haven't lost the work that's been done. It's just layered a version on top. And again, I can go through and do comparisons and that type of thing and get all of that out of the box. So as I say, if you simply just rename that file before you upload it, then you can just ensure there's still a single version of that document and not this need for work in progress areas.
Yeah, that's a great one, Ben. When you're back into Word and you do compare this to previous versions, that's all in there. So they have made updates and maybe not called them out. You're going to see it straight away.
Yeah, exactly. So the second scenario we talked about was with a major and minor versions. So what I'm going to do is click into the policies area a second. So again, historical scenario where maybe the HR department manage their own policies and they publish them to their HR folder, for instance, or their HR site. So in that scenario, and again, this concept of major and minor versions has been around for quite a long time in SharePoint. And we can see on these documents that this one has got a major and a minor version. So it's version 1.1. So the major version is 1 and the minor is 1. This document doesn't have a major version yet, which means that only people that can edit this document will be able to see it. No one else will be able to see it. So if I wanted to go and take a document and publish it from a minor to a major, I can select it and click on the publish button. Okay. So I'm going to go and do that. It's now version 1.0. If I wanted to go and modify that, and we'll go in, make a couple of changes, additional changes go here. So we'll give that a second to save. So that's saved. Okay. Sometimes this takes a few seconds to come through. So we can see that that has now got a draft on it. If I wanted to republish it, I see now that option says republish. Now, this is great and it's quite simple to set up and it's fairly easy to use. The problem with it is it's very easy to forget. I see this all the time where you have a whole load of documents here that are just 0 points on them because no one has actually ever remembered to push the publish button. It's not that obvious necessarily. It's not that much of a visual cue that it's there, so people forget to do it. There is another problem with this as well, which is that if I am the person that can draft or edit a document, then if I was to search or get a result back, I'm always going to see the current draft. But let's say, for instance, I'm preparing next year's version of a policy and I'm editing that existing document, working on the draft version. If I actually want to know what the definitive point of that policy is as it is right now, and that's what Copilot's going to refer to, well, I'm going to see the answers from the draft and not the last published version. So again, if you're someone that's editing these things, that can be a bit confusing. So we then move on to the third approach, which is something that we've applied within our policy framework, our Policy Express framework, which is where we separate out draft versions from published versions, but we have automation to manage that process. So if I go into a masters area here, I can see all of the master versions of these documents. And actually these are in Word format. So people can work on, they can do their drafts. Permissions have been managed so that only certain sets of people get to see this. And then as they go through the publishing process, a PDF version will be generated and filed and made available for everyone else. So if I'm someone that's drafting, I'm not getting confused between what the published version is and what the current version is that I'm working on because they have been separated. But how do we deal with that scenario? We've effectively created two documents. How can we minimize the impact on Copilot? Well, what we can do is we can actually disable this area from being indexed. So effectively, it's not going to be indexed. It's purely a working area. And then Copilot is only going to be able to pull results from our single version of the truth, which is our published library. So I think we've just kind of summarized those three approaches, taking on what's out of the box, user adoption, and being pragmatic about these things. So yeah, Rupert, if you want to kind of take us away to wrap up.
Yeah. So last point first, maybe, Ben. Interesting to see how you separated the working and publish. And the key bit about Copilot is you can exclude parts of your SharePoint environment from Copilot's scope. So let's say you work on next year's holiday policy and it says we're now going to get 30 days holiday, yet you want to type a question saying how many holiday days do I get now? You wanted to pull back, say 25, because that's the current policy. So separating is the right thing to do by taking things out of the search index, as Ben touched on earlier, that you can configure that. That is the way to exclude content from Copilot. Obviously, the other side of that is Copilot does respect security. So you don't have access to it in the first place. This isn't a problem. Where you have access to both areas, this is what we're trying to solve here. So let me summarize the 3 points very quickly of what you've seen today as our takeaways. So number one, about standardizing naming. Obviously, the goal is to achieve consistency. So how can we do that? There's a starting point around user behavior. But then Ben showed us automations around on creation using drop downs and on upload using automatic naming formats based on metadata. We then moved on to tagging documents and how we can do that. So we talked about user behavior. Obviously, training people is one thing, but actually we can base rules based on where the document's either being created from. So this is a employee contract, so let's tag it as a contract, or B, where that document is sitting. So this is Acme Corp, so let's tag it with Acme Corp. And so we can use a mix of those two plus manual tagging to achieve that goal. The last piece that Ben we touched on there was AI classification and a couple of ways that that could be achieved. And that's all part of SharePoint Premium. But we think that's going to become more and more popular, particularly as people migrate large data sets into SharePoint. And as a side note there about archive and how that might fit in. Finally, we looked at version control. Naturally, there's a education from people who've come from a file server area, and if that's how they've been working. Obviously, there's a bit of learning there. And also the challenges around if we share documents via email. Now, it might be that that's the governance controls in your environment. You're not allowed to bring external people in, and that might be the way you have to work. We talked about major and minor versions and the challenges around that and why we don't actually see that a lot in practice, and how we can use content separation and search or disabling search to help drive that approach. So they're the three key themes of what we covered today. As I said earlier, this is a series of events around Copilot readiness. The final one is around SharePoint governance. So do tune in for that. And we're going to be talking about how to set up SharePoint in the best way, considering the document and lifecycle. That brings today to a wrap. If you're looking for help with Copilot, SharePoint, document management, document lifecycle, that's where we come in. So do reach out to myself or Ben and let's have a conversation. Otherwise, thank you for your time today.